Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Monday, February 28th. Yeah, we're about ready to say goodbye to February. Probably a good time to do that. Hasn't exactly been a good month for a myriad of reasons. But on this episode, we begin our outfield preview, which is probably a two-parter, maybe 2.5 parts. You got to put utility-only players somewhere. Maybe we could do catchers in like 8 minutes because it's the worst position in the entire fantasy pool. So there's lots of ways around this, but lots to get to today. So not a lot of rambling. We did get back out and play pickleball again on Sunday and had a beer. So I feel like that's a small victory.
Yeah, and I scored I think 4 points in one of the games, so I'm making some progress.
Yep. And I have been inspired by Chad Bradford to try and work on a new serve where I get the paddle very low and hit a very funky ultra spin serve that does all sorts of nasty things on its way.
Related, to my difficulty in scoring points.
Yeah, it's going okay. I still have a little work to do. Got to get in front of the high speed cameras and
see how the ball comes off the paddle and
make sure I've got the right efficiency, all those things. But we begin with our outfield preview. As we do on all these episodes, we're looking at things by NFBC ADP tier, just looking at players clustered together, trying to decide whether or not they're overvalued, undervalued, figuring out who we like, who we don't like. The elite outfield group is really good. I'm going to call this group the first rounders and occasional first rounders. All of these players have carried ADPs inside the top 20 overall over the last 2 weeks. We're looking back from February 14th through February 28th for draft results. And that group includes Tatis and Soto and Acuña, Harper, Kyle Tucker, Mike Trout, Mookie Betts, and Luis Robert. So we have a really good group of players. We've talked about Tatis before. Soto is the pick I just made in the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational, which got underway on Monday. So that was from the number 5 spot overall. Happy to get him there. This is a group that it's almost more like, is there anyone in this group you don't trust at their price? Because with Tatis and Soto, like we know who they are, and the ceiling seems to be limitless. With Tatis, just a shoulder question. Acuña's coming off the ACL injury, so it'd be great to see him having a spring training of some kind just to know where he's at compared to everybody else. I look at this group and I think Kyle Tucker maybe is the one that I'm a little bit skeptical of. I think it was our friends Scott Jenstead and Jeff Erickson who brought this up on the RotoWire pod maybe a week or so ago. And I think the issue I have when I look at Tucker's profile, is I'm not sure we're getting more speed. I think he doesn't necessarily have to do that to return first round value. But if he doesn't run more or if he doesn't take another step forward offensively, and he's already a good player, I just wonder if what we saw last year is actually pretty close to his peak level, right? So again, it's picking nits. I'm not saying he's totally out of place here, but he's the one name that sort of jumps off the page along with Robert that you could probably pick a few more holes in his case than some of these other players.
Yeah, Tucker really stands out. You can, on the auction calculator over at Fangraphs, you can sort by ADP and then look over at the dollar amounts, and there's a tight correlation, of course, but Tucker's the one that stands out in a bad way. I mean, you've got Tatis at $41, you got Soto at 35, Harper at 30, and then Acuña at 35, and then Tucker at 24. And then it goes back up to Trout at 29, Mookie Betts at 32. So it really stands out in a bad way. I'm receptive to the idea that, he's 25 years old, 26 and 27, that he's in the peak range. And it's possible that he could have a better batting average, I guess, because, if he repeats at a 16% strikeout rate with that power, and then has a little bit more batted ball luck, you could have like a 310, 315 kind of season alongside 35, homers, and the projections are saying 20 steals. But he stole 14 last year, and he's going to be the big power hitter on this team with Alvarez, I guess. And there's a lot of risk on the base paths. I don't see the Astros as a go-go team in terms of, sending him a lot. I could see them saying, "Hey, you're our 3-hitter, like just take off when in spare opportunities where you don't think there'll be a play and you don't get hurt." So I could see him just stealing another 12 bases next year. And I guess the floor is high because of his age and because of his strikeout rate and because of the power. So I guess people like that the floor is high and there is some opportunity for him maybe to steal more if he just decides to.
If you're looking for an outfielder, you're looking at Tucker versus Trout versus Betts versus Robert too. If you want to include him as part of this conversation, you're sitting somewhere in the back part of round 1, maybe the early part of round 2 if we're talking about a slightly smaller league. How do you order those guys? I mean, you have the longer track record from a guy like Betts. You have,
I guess it's health, right? It's
mm-hmm.
because if you told me you're going to get a full season from all 3 of these guys, I would order them Trout, Betts, Tucker.
Right. I would too. And I think that's where projections are in terms of WOBA, in terms of power. There's still some speed in the profile for Trout, even though I would expect him to run the least of that entire group, even if you equalized all the playing time. But that's where it's the health that makes it complicated. Tucker being younger, not having any sort of massive injury history to be worried about right now. I think that's part of what's nudging him up this way too. And then you can talk yourself into him getting better. I mean, he didn't max out playing time volume. Played 140 games last year, 567 plate appearances. So another 10 games, another 50 or so plate appearances would push him into the low 600 range. That's not unheard of. If he repeated with that extra volume, the numbers would go up a little bit. Houston's a good lineup. They're going to score plenty of runs. He's going to drive in plenty of runs. So there's a lot of floor there. But the area where I actually became most concerned the more I looked at Kyle Tucker was that there's not a lot of reason to believe that Houston will give him more green lights, even though he's a great base stealer. He's 28 for 32 for his career. It doesn't seem like their organizational philosophy is to maximize.
Yeah, I expect him to
running.
go, 12 for 14 again. Just like, be really high percentage. But that's not where he's giving the most value to his team. He's more valuable at the plate. So don't risk it, on the base pass, I don't think. Trout is amazing. People, if you listen to this, you'll hear about reach rate and barrel rate. It's in the name of the show. and Trout is really cool because among outfielders, he's got the 3rd best barrel rate. And among the top 20 in barrel rates, he has the 2nd best reach rate. So that's part of what makes Mike Trout good, and that's why I look for it in other players. Other players that do similarly well, but don't have the speed or are missing the sort of bat to ball component are Joey Gallo, 2nd in barrel rate and 2nd in reach rate. Another one that profiles similarly is Kyle Schwarber. He is 8th in barrel rate and 4th in reach rate. So, good. And then God of baseball, Juan Soto, is only 20th in barrel rate, but 1st in reach rate. So just wanted to give a shout out to those that are doing the good process things underneath the hood. And a shout out to Mike Trout. I mean, he could be healthy this year. And I've got plenty of shares. I've taken him at the back end of the 1st round, beginning of the 2nd round without compunction. Am I using that right? With
I actually don't know for sure.
Is it without or with?
You're using a corner of
What
the
is
vocabulary that I don't
compunction?
even use. So
Wait, let's ask Google. Google.
it's like when you play golf with your friend and your friend takes out a golf club you've never seen before and they hit it in a very strange situation. You're like, yeah, maybe that worked.
It's a feeling of guilt or moral scruple.
Yeah.
So I'm
without
taking Trout
compunction.
without compunction.
Yeah.
There we go.
Correct usage. I think the Trout thing for me, I'm in at the price. I'll take the discount. I know there's injury risk. I think part of the question you have to answer is what do you think a healthy season for him looks like in terms of games played? I think when you look at the wear and tear on him and the different injuries he's dealt with, expecting him to bounce back to 680 plus appearances where he lived for 4 years from 2013 to 2016 is probably silly. They have good outfield depth. They are going to lean into that. They're going to try and keep him as healthy as possible. But his per game performance could be as good as any hitter in the pool still. I think the skills are still there. I'm not buying the increased K rate, because the reach rate is still very good. Yes, he had a 456 BABIP in 36 games last year. I don't care. It does not matter to me. It's useless information
He
at
has
this
a
point for me.
350 BABIP for his career, man. This guy
Right.
hits the ball hard.
Right. He's not going to turn into this old wooden ship from an athleticism standpoint, like quickly. It's not going to happen. It's going to be a graceful decline.
His
It's just a
pull rate
matter of
was
how much
pretty
time he's
high
going to lose.
last year, but it's also a short sample.
146 plate appearances. Yeah, I'm gonna let that one go. So I'm in on Trout at the
There
1-2
could be some
turn.
load management. You were kind of talking about like you don't think he'll get back to like 680 plate appearances. He hasn't been there in a while.
Right,
So
but
there's
even
going to be
in
some
this
load
group,
management. I would expect like sort of the 2019, 2018, 600 plate appearances is a full season. But in those years, he managed to average 42 homers, 105 runs, 100 RBI, and 12 steals with a 300 average. So,
right. I think there's a few
that's pretty
players
good.
here. There's only a few players in this group that don't have a load management issue as a result of past injuries or literally an injury that they're coming back from, right? You could say Acuña is going to have some load management or projected lost time on the front side.
Soto might have
shoulder.
some tanking load management.
Jeez. I mean, I don't think he'll have that. I don't think Harper will have it. I don't think Tucker has any sort of, workload restrictions right now. Betts could probably have that. So you do have a few other guys in this group that might not be max volume players. But even with those concerns for both Trout and Betts, I like them both at the 1-2 turn. I think Betts is still really stable. I think being in a great lineup keeps that floor really high. And that's part of why I like Trout. I mean, I think the way that lineup is built, healthy Anthony Rendon, Shohei Ohtani being there, Jared Walsh being a solid secondary guy. I mentioned some of the outfield depth. They can get steps forward from Marsh and Adele. I just think this is a team that could actually put a lot of runs on the board.
What was the earned value on Mookie Betts? Because it's funny to think, he had a bad season. He might fall out. He's falling out of the first round. I don't know, like, 264, 23 homers, 10 stolen bases, not a full season. It's pretty good season for a bad season, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, the earn value from RotoWire was $16 in a 15-team league, and that was with missed time. So if you just said he stayed healthier, he would have got to probably 20.
So and the spot probably gave you 20. You probably got some value off of the waiver wire.
Yeah, there's
Outfield
a
is
decent
not
chance
that
he
hard
did.
to replace. So I don't know. I'm taking Trout and Betts around that turn, and I think I have one team where I doubled up.
The only downside to that is the scenarios we've talked about where you're waiting on pitching and then 3-4 doesn't break your way, and then you're in the DVR. Tyler Mally's your ace bucket real quick. So just
another
thing,
another risk, and this is more about long-term draft strategy and maybe deeper drafts, is that there are a lot of outfielders at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to take one outfielder at the top just because they're a great bat, sure, and then maybe even two. It's if it makes sense. But if you have 3 outfielders in a 5 outfield, 15-team draft early on, I think you'll find at the end, like, dang it, can I fit more outfielders onto this squad somehow?
Yeah, that can definitely happen.
I try to kind of just I'm not taking away from their auction value, because the auction calculator has sort of spidered it and looked at it, and is judging the various positions against each other well, and I don't want to like undo that work. But sometimes if the auction values are close, I'll take the non-outfielder in the early and middle, because I'm just super sure that there's outfielders going to be waiting for me at the end.
Yeah, lots of paths to replace, to fill that spot later on, and to replace that player in season 2 if you lose a player in the outfield. So it's not as important for me to lock in someone who I feel great about, because I think replacement level in season tends to be a tick higher in the outfield than it is elsewhere. Robert is probably the most exciting player of this group from a what could happen perspective. Massive changes to the K rate in his second season, but it was only a partial season. It was a sample only slightly bigger than what he was able to give us in 2020. 20.6% for the K rate. That's a massive improvement from 32.2%. He still had a O-swing percentage that was very concerning, 44.5%. So in
I
this
assume
case,
there's going to be a regression there.
There has to be, right? So the projections point to 270, a high 270s, low 280s for the batting average. Are you comfortable with that? I mean, it splits the difference between 2020 and 2021, and it pulls closer. The projections pull closer to the 2021 strikeout percentage. They all have him going up to the 23 to 25% range, I think. But does that all sort of check out in your head? Because there's not that much of a difference in the projections between Tucker and Robert.
Yeah, that's just not how I appraise it in my head, though. I think of Tucker as like a
Tucker
much
seems a lot safer.
saver. Yeah. I do love Luis has such incredible athleticism and skills, and so I don't want to say that I don't like him. As a player, I love watching him, but I do think that the reduced strikeout rate came from a change in his approach in terms of he became more aggressive. If you look at his first pitch swing rates, his swing rates in general, he swung more often early in the counts. He swung 61% of the time last year against the average of 47%. Like
Well,
he was, it's
probably
not
seen more
just
strikes.
reaching, it's everything. He's swinging. He just swung a ton. And I saw a really interesting graphic from Tom Tango, and I'm going to be writing about this extensively at some point. I've got a big piece planned on this, but Tango showed the number of runs a player has put together over their career on takes and the number of runs, in terms of production, value they put up on swings. And there were literally hundreds of players that had lots of value on takes, over their careers. This was like a career thing. It was like kind of Hall level type names, right? There were like 25 batters that had positive values on swings.
It's pretty interesting. So I have a little bit of a theory, I guess. I haven't had time. I just thought about this now. If you tend to be aggressive on pitches outside the zone, either because you just have an overall aggressive approach or you don't have a very good sense of the strike zone or some combination of both, it mathematically in my head makes a lot more sense to be aggressive on the first pitch because you're probably getting first pitch strikes. You're probably getting pitches in the zone a lot more often because pitchers want to get ahead. So even if it's a breaking ball, it's probably in the zone more often than not on that first pitch. So if you have this Robert sort of free swinging approach, Javier Baez would probably fit into this category too. Even Castellanos could fit into this. You should be hunting that first pitch, hunting a fastball because you could just crush it, and you're not going to end up in a spot later in the count where you're flailing at pitches outside the zone that you have even less chance of hitting.
Yeah, I mean, another way of saying it is if you have poor sense of the zone, why you really want to avoid two strikes. Like, you don't want to wait and wait. And if you're not likely to tell the balls from strikes that well, then don't see more pitches go by because a lot of them could be strikes. So it's not my preferred player to hitch my wagon to. But I suppose if Trout and Betts were gone, or if I wanted to, the steals are there. I think that, it's likely he could hit like 240 next year. But even if he hits 240, I feel like he'll hit 25 to 30 homers and he'll steal 20 plus bags.
Yeah. No, I mean, for his career, he's played 124 games in the big leagues. He's got 24 homers, 15 steals, and 18 attempts. And that's, it's not even a full season. Yeah, that's really for your first 124 games. That's outstanding.
And his team, I think, would let him go. I don't know if that's a poor read of the White Sox, but I think that his team will let him steal bases. So, I think it's a fine pick in the middle of the second round. I think around the turn where he goes, I may want to go Trout pitcher or Betts pitcher. I may want Tucker. Or there may be another bat that falls. I may want to get a pitcher in the second, so that if I'm afraid of what happens, what pitcher gets back to me in the third. So I think that it's one of those things again where I might end up just going in a different direction.
Yeah, that's been the pattern for me so far. And I've had a lot of spots where I've been picking early in round 2, and I've been avoiding Robert so far. Not like because I don't believe, but because the other players in that range seem either safer or they just offer something completely different as
He also,
starting pitchers or higher
yeah,
floors, whatever it might be.
he really stood out in the same way as Tucker, in the auction calculator. I guess the fair question is the auction calculator not valuing steals enough, right? If Tucker and Robert and Marte are, the guys that kind of stick out ADP wise versus dollar value wise, maybe that's why. Mullins has a $21 auction value and goes ahead of Aaron Judge, who has a $26 one. Well, guess what Aaron Judge doesn't do?
Yeah, doesn't steal bases. I'm waiting for someone to email or tweet at us after this episode and say, yes, stolen bases are undervalued. Don't tell anyone because we're getting first round talent in the second and third round because everybody thinks that the public facing tools are all right, but they're not calibrated correctly. I think that's possible.
What I have noticed, and there's a couple tweets about this that are pretty cool, and I'm not even gonna butcher a name or because I can't remember exactly who did it, but there's a couple analyses out there where they looked at basically, how the steals premium and how much over dollar value, like auction value, dollar value, are people paying, and it ended up being from just sort of my appraisal of looking at it, that the ones who steal sort of 20 or 30 are getting the biggest premium. That you're spending the most on just their steals. So it ended up being Marte, Mullins, Jazz, Chisholm were kind of the three that you're paying the most just for their steals. And the ones that you're paying the least for, and this is part of why it's my strategy, are the ones that give you 10 steals or 12 steals, so that's Soto is not a zero in steals. Harper is not a zero in steals. Those are the places where you're getting the full line and you're getting some steals, but you're not paying the most for them. So it's it's a thing that I try to do is get a bunch of 10 steals guys. It works for the most part, but I think you because you have catchers and first baseman, you do need to mix in some 20s and 30s at some point in your draft.
Right. And that tends to be within this group of top 100 overall picks. We'll have a few other sources of speed, of course, coming up here as we move through these tiers. Let's drop into tier 2. That group includes Yordan, Alvarez, Starling, Marte, Teoscar, Hernández, Whit, Merrifield, who also has second base eligibility, Aaron Judge, Cedric Mullins, and Tyler O'Neill. So most of the names you were just mentioning all go in this range. These are top 50 overall picks. With Yordan, I think the knees seem to be okay, and we're at a point where what he's accomplished as a hitter to this point in his young big league career.
And I just love him as a hitter, man. Just in terms of what you look for in a hitter, he's almost perfect.
It points to a ceiling that's more like Vlad or Devers. Like that's the type of hitter that he is. So it kind of seems like this could be the sweet spot where he's still just a tick undervalued. And because he has outfield eligibility this year, that might not be something he has in future years. This could be the prime year to have Alvarez. And we could be talking about him as a guy that gets up one more level and pops 40 home runs and does it with an even better batting average than we saw in 2021 with the usual runs and RBIs. Yeah, he's probably a 0 or a 1 in the stolen base category. So
yeah,
adjust accordingly.
I mean, that's why he's even available, But if you like Freddie Freeman, you should like Yordan Alvarez. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He does a lot of the same things. Really low swing strike rate, really good eye at the plate, really good barrel rate. Just a really solid hitter with power to all fields and a good approach at the plate, I think. So I love Alvarez. I don't have. I think I have very few shares though. It's an interesting part of the draft. I think he's a third rounder, and I've been taking starting pitching in the third round.
Yeah, if you're in a 15-teamer, he's going just before the end of 2. If you're in a 12-teamer, it's just the early part of 3. So you kind of need to have an early first-round position to end up with him in snakes right now, unless you jump him up quite a bit. But I mean, I think your Freddie Freeman sort of comparison is on point. And I think with if you were to go hitter pitcher and then you're sitting there in 3 in a 12-teamer and Alvarez is still there, I think I'd be
Yeah.
content to pass on the next pitcher and just go ahead and take
Yeah.
Alvarez and wait it out a little bit on
Like, just, I
speed.
mean, it's just weird. Somebody is going to take Hendricks or Hader over this beautiful hitter, this just hitting God. I mean, it's also one of those things where it's like, I wish upon all of you the ability to stand on the field during batting practice when Yordan Alvarez is in the cage. I mean, everybody's paying attention. Everybody's looking.
Might have to get credentialed for A's
Well,
Astros games to do that.
You could get close. You're just showing up early.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I maybe could get a credential, so I should consider that possibility for selfish reasons. But the Alvarez projection, I think, is pretty similar to what you get from Aaron Judge, right? I mean, you got a guy that's projected to be in the high 270s, big power, great run production. I think both have some injury risk.
That's the good comp, though, because they both have injury risk. Yeah, the knees on Alvarez are not great.
So. But he didn't really have any issues last year, right? I mean, we're talking about 144 games like that. If you were looking back at some of the polls that were happening this time last year, where people were saying, how many games are you really expecting Alvarez to play? How many plate appearances? I would guess they skewed much lower than 144 and 598. I realize surgery on both knees, just as a blanket sort of thing, is pretty scary. But I think the question I have with Judge is, how worried are you about his injuries? Like, in the sense that one of them, I think, was a hit by pitch in the wrist, right? So he missed a bunch of time because of that. I know sometimes it's more soft tissue stuff with him, but I always worry that when we get that mix of both of those things, the bad luck plus some of the more chronic things, that we tend to overcorrect and say a player is more risky than he really is. Because the floor from a skills perspective on Judge is outstanding. I find myself constantly wanting to draft him in the range where he goes, even though he's another one of those early round mashers that doesn't offer much in the stolen base category.
Yeah, I guess I'm worried. I just wanted to look up sprint speeds real quick. Yordan Alvarez 406 out of 557. So I mean, it's not good, but he's not with the catchers. I think at some point in his career he will be with the catchers. You know what I mean? But he's not there yet. I mean, around 406, you're talking Jurickson Profar, Reese Hoskins,
Profar runs like that.
Isaac Paredes, Matt Duffy.
I'm surprised Profar has fallen that much. Wow,
he's really slow.
Whoa.
I just want to get a sense of where Judge is. Just like sort of a proxy, I think, for health. I mean, he's at 232, so he's running with like David Peralta, Josh Rojas, Andrew Benintendi. So I mean, I think that's a good sign for his health. I do get a little bit of the Rick Smits vibe where it's just like this is just a lot. It's a lot of body. And and you think about it, the Yankees are really good at gathering these huge athletic human beings, and yet they also have had some issues with injuries. So there is proof out there in terms of research that more weight is rough on your knees, and larger people don't live as long. So I didn't mean to get so mortal.
Sorry if you are one of our taller listeners. It's a pretty bleak way to start your week.
Sorry.
Very sorry.
But I'm just looking. I mean, the nice thing about Judge is you open up a StatCast page and it's all red. I mean, it's literally red. And red is top 10 or top 5% of the league. So dude is really good at hitting the ball really hard. And for what it's worth, like decent plate approach and not like a guy who whiffs a lot,
So it's basically a philosophical question. If you're getting hitters in this range, a lot of them are outfielders. You got a few elite closers, Hendricks Hader, you got Bieber tucked in here, Urias. Do you prefer the likes of Alvarez and Judge and to the speedy outfielders that go in this range? Starling Marte and Whit Merrifield go in this range too. And then there's Teoscar Hernández, who feels like the guy who's out of place, but made some significant skills improvements last year. And if he's sustaining that improved K rate, then I think maybe he does actually have a case to stay pretty close to this range. Mullins also goes in this range too, for what it's worth. Like, what is your general approach if you do end up with the position where all of these options are at your disposal, late round 2, early round 3? Which route do you prefer to go?
Auction calculator says it should be Judge and Alvarez, by $5 over the speedy guys. And so I think in my drafts, $1 or $2. I'm not such an absolutist that I'm like, this is my value, and that's it. But $5, I'm like, well, gosh, man, that's $5. That's a big deal. I'm going to take one of those guys and then hope one of the speed guys falls, because I do look downwind and see, these guys don't steal a ton of bases, but I see some Brian Reynolds, Christian Yelich, Tyler O'Neill had the best batted balls in baseball last year, batted ball quality in baseball last year. So I do see some opportunities to get steals in the next bunch of outfielders. And so, if you're just asking me, it'd be Judge and Alvarez that I'd be taking. But I did want to point something out that Cardi tweeted about Derek Cardi, the creator of the bat projections, said, pretend all you know is that player X was 40 for 40 in stolen bases last year. How many stolen bases would you expect if drafting him this year? And Derek Cardi said his most likely outcome is 28 stolen bases.
Because of the way players age and that category falls off quickly because of the hazards of running, like all those kinds of factors.
Yeah, I mean, he clarifies some aspects of it, but he's trying to keep everything static and still getting 28 stolen bases. I think you've seen work from Jeff Zimmerman saying that stolen bases age terribly. That's something we know, that we've talked about it on this podcast. So I think it's aging. I think it's just generally the league going away from it. And then it's factors like I was kind of saying about like Kyle Tucker, right? Where it's, teams being like, hey, listen, we know you can steal bases. Like, what are they going to tell Mike Trout this year? You know what I mean? Like,
let's not hurt your cap.
Bases. Yeah, no. Exactly.
No, over under on Trout stolen bases for me is like 6.5.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like one a month if we get a full season. I'm sorry to depress everyone with our commentary about all people.
Death and
God, we are just tanking right now.
Happy Monday morning.
I'm in a good mood. Like, if you were watching on YouTube, I think my face has a nice sun-kissed glow to it. I got sun yesterday. Like, I'm happy. The table sawing sounds outside my window have stopped during our recording, which is just an absolute miracle. Like, things are looking up. I think the other question here, okay, so maybe Alvarez and Judge are your preferred options of this group. If they're not there, it's a little bit later, and the speed options are still there, and you're looking at Starling Marte and Whit Merrifield and Cedric Mullins, do you have a strong preference within that group of three? I like Mullins the most because I think Mullins breaks the projections. You stop switch hitting, it changes everything about your profile as a hitter, and you have this massive breakout. Projection systems can't handle that very well. It's this, they can give you a better sense of reality than dreaming on the potential the way I like to in my mind. But I look at the numbers, and compared to other early rounders, it's actually a good bit of red ink with my conditional cheat sheet formatting. A 254 projected average, 21 homers, 25 steals, a low RBI total because of his lineup and lineup position. A good number of runs scored, 86, but you'd expect 100 plus if you were in a better lineup. So I understand some of the warts, but I tend to think that Cedric Mullins is actually the best player out of the three between Mullins, Marte, and Merrifield. The problem for Mullins is that Marte might be in a much, much better lineup, right? So he might just be flat out better because of circumstances that are out of both of their control.
Yes, but there's a couple things that are interesting about Marte's projection too, which is that one of his skills is getting hit by pitches.
That's not, yeah, it's a skill, but it's an occupational hazard too.
It's a risky skill, yeah. And he's lost time over the years. You know, I remember early on we were saying, "Oh, Stanton is not necessarily injury prone. He just got hit, in the face that one time." That was early on, but it turned out that he did have soft tissue problems over his career. You could say the same about Marte. Oh, a lot of these injuries have been just being hit by pitches, but he stands really close to the box and gets hit by pitches, like it's part of his deal. So, and then the other thing is the stadium there. I think it's kind of hard to get a good park factor for Citi Field. I've talked to people within the game who are like, do people not know that that's like a ridiculous pitcher's park all of a sudden? There every year we consider or write a piece about why balls are performing weirdly in Citi Field. They're one of the teams that added a humidor, and it wasn't because they're super humid or super dry or up in a mile up in the sky. It's just because they were like, we don't know why the balls are performing so weirdly. And so we're just going to try and keep things the same humidity and see if that changes things. And I don't think it necessarily did. So there's something weird about that ballpark. And though I like that he hits the ball better than Whit Merrifield and would take him over Whit Merrifield, I could see taking Mullins over Marte because now the difference, even by projections, is $2, right? It's not the $5 difference. And if you consider that maybe Marte's 600 plate appearance projection is a little risky given his skills, and then what is his power going to look like in New York, then I could see taking Mullins over Marte, and I think that's a decent way to rank the speed options: Mullins, Marte, Merrifield.
Maybe it's the Cardi stuff that you were just mentioning a few minutes ago, right? You look at a player who's 33 years old and you say, okay, yeah, if he was 40 for 40 last year, we'd expect 28, and he was 47 for 52. So the projection's still going to come out pretty nice in the low 30s for steals. But we're talking about a guy who's old.
Oh, I wonder if that tweet was about
old.
Marte.
It could be. I mean, there's it's a 6-year age difference between Mullins and Marte. And there's also the difference of the Orioles still rebuilding, green lights aplenty. For the Mets, maybe you don't have to give Marte maximum green lights because you're scoring plenty of runs. Again, we're talking about losing some steals in the margins. We're not talking about epic sorts of collapses, but I think Mullins is just exactly the type of weird case that kind of breaks down a system, and then he ends up ranking lower than he should for a lot of people.
You also have a season in 2019 where Marte stole 25 bags with 23 homers.
Right. Well, and you're getting a big difference in power too. Like, yeah, changes the Camden yards, but Cedric Mullins hit 30 home runs last year. What's the career high for Starling Marte? 23 in 2019 with the rabbit ball. And he hits the ball on the ground a ton. He's run a 50% ground ball rate or higher each of the last 4 seasons. Starling Marte is not popping 20 home runs again with that approach in that park. That's just not going to happen. He has to change some things he's doing with his swing if that's really going to happen. So, maybe you get 10 more steals or 15 more steals from Marte, but you might get 20 more home runs from Cedric Mullins this year. So that's a huge difference between them two. It's not just that one category.
Yeah.
I've liked Starling Marte for a long time. I think all of this is to say that I can't quite figure out why Cedric Mullins is sinking a little bit in this group of early rounders. I think he's legitimately maybe a sneaky first rounder. I believed that. And I love that he's slipped a little bit because if I could get him in the late part of round 3, I'm happy to see what's next.
It's also just kind of bizarre for me that, Marte used to be like a sneaky great pick in the 3rd and 4th rounds, right? And then he got older and older and older, and now people are like taking him in 2nd,
Fear of missing out on steals, recency bias, all those things. He's still a good player. I'm finding that the increased price, a little bit of extra risk, it just doesn't quite feel the same as it did a couple years ago when it comes to taking Marte where he goes. We should get to Tyler O'Neill real quick. An absurd barrel rate last season, 17.9%, which gives you a bit of a cushion when you strike out 30% of the time. His O-swing percentage isn't at all like Luis Robert's. We talked about that earlier, over 40%. So I think there's a chance that Tyler O'Neill could still lower the K rate just a little bit. And if you need proof, look at the other guy in this group who's kind of similar to him in Teoscar Hernández, who had plenty of red ink in the past, had a K rate north of 30% that made me a little bit skeptical of him a year ago, brought that down to the 20% range. And here we are with Teoscar Hernández, holding an ADP inside the top 40. Tyler O'Neill, in or out for 2022 at the increased price?
I have a share. I really like that he had this expected extra base hits category. This research that was done by Max Bay before he went to the Astros that beats barrel rate and predictive quality. So I like that he was number one last year in that stat. And I think that Teoscar, which one would you take? I think I would take Tyler over Teoscar. He stole more bases last year than Teoscar ever has.
If we're equalizing the price, that becomes really difficult. I think it's easier to pass on Hernandez, knowing you can get O'Neill maybe a round later in some cases. Yeah. But if they both, let's say Hernandez dropped to like pick 40 and O'Neill crept up to pick 40, straight up, I think I'd be on the Hernandez side. There's a pretty decent gap still between the quality of the Jays lineup and the quality of the Cardinals lineup, and I think that's enough of a difference for me. Yeah,
the park matters.
Yep. So again, I'm not expecting a massive drop in O'Neill's K percentage, but I just think Hernandez did it, and I didn't think Hernandez could. So I've opened my mind to that possibility that we don't have to live in a world where Tyler O'Neill continues to strike out more than 30% of the time in perpetuity. There's at least a glimmer of hope.
Yeah. And Teoscar did have that sort of 38% in a short sample, 31, 33, and got it down to 25% last year. If Tyler O'Neill did that, ooh, baby.
Gross, right? I mean, 40 plus homers and 20 steals. I mean, more balls in play, more times on base. There's just a lot of things he could do, and he'd carry a great average, I think, to go with it. So now everyone's excited. Maybe we're going to get people back on the optimistic side.
But even with projections in the 31% range, the batting average at 250, 260, it's because of the quality of his batted balls. And I feel like that's not going to sink your team. I think, mm-hmm. What do you think? What are benchmarks for batting average in 15 teams leagues right now?
What does it take to be like top 3 in a league like that?
I mean, I
guess
think
it's like high 260s, low 270s.
Yeah, I would say 270. So you would just need a guy who could hit 280 to pair with him at his projected batting average.
Yeah, not a lot of concern there. So I'm warming up to O'Neill where he goes. Haven't drafted him yet. Not going to have him on half of my remaining teams or anything like that, but I could definitely end up with him at least once or twice before draft season is over. All right, the goal today is going to be to get through at least the top 100 overall picks that happen to be outfielders, because tier 3 is pretty big. This is a great group of players that stretches from 50 to 100. It includes Buxton and Springer, Castellanos, Randy Arozarena, Eloy, Ketel Marte, JD Martinez, Tommy Edman, who has second base eligibility too, Dalton Varsho, catcher eligibility, Brian Reynolds, Giancarlo Stanton, Cody Bellinger, Chris Bryant, and Christian Yelich. I mean, we have all sorts of paths to go down here. We'll start with Buxton. The questions at this point are more about health than skills. He's quietly improved his skills to look like an early round guy if he can just stay on the field for 550 to 600 plate appearances. As a center fielder who's a great defender, that can happen. It's just a matter of not having something go wrong, a collision with the wall, fouling a ball off his ankle, getting hit that pitch, straining a hamstring, all the types of things that have stacked up against him. Risk reward, we talked about it with Alberto Mondesi a lot. Buxton versus Mondesi kind of ends up being a decision you can make in the broader player pool in this range. who do you trust more based on core skills you've seen and their respective injury ledgers to this point?
I like Buxton's plate approach better. So I'm going to take Buxton between those two. Buxton is the best projected value on this list that you just gave, other than Nick Castellanos. And Buxton is only projected for 497 plate appearances. So there's some of that risk is built in. I mean, there's the chance he gets to 600. I would like Byron Buxton to talk to Bryce Harper, because Bryce Harper used to get injured, flying around the outfield. And then in his contract year, like they were able, I think Ben Lindbergh showed that he was not trying as hard, was not taking the risks, was not diving as much. And in fact, there was a piece that just came out by Mark Simon over at Baseball Info Solutions, where he pointed out that Pete Alonso is putting himself at risk for injury by being the divingest first baseman in baseball. He dives more than anybody else by a factor of about a third. So, and they said that they've shown and proven that diving, the people who start, stop, and dive the most are the ones who get injured the most. So I would say to Buxton, let a couple balls fall in, man, and live to take another plate appearance. So I don't know. I don't know if that just doesn't work with his mindset. He's a very exciting player to watch, and I wouldn't necessarily want to take away from that excitement, but I would also love to see what a 650 plate appearance Byron Buxton season looks like.
It'd be a career high by about 140 plate appearances if it happened. Last 4 seasons, 254, 135, 295, and 94 plate appearances for Buxton. So, yes, why does he go here? Well, that's a hell of an injury history to be worried about, but still a great base stealer, even with the added power. 9 of 10 last year, just in 61 games, popped the 19 home runs. Still doesn't draw a ton of walks, but he's lowered the K rate from where it was earlier in his career. If he's in the 23 to 25% range with the rate he's barreling the ball, that is going to work out just fine for Buxton. He's going to be right in the heart of that Twins order too. So kind of a bounce back team for me. And I think the fact that they went ahead and committed to him with a longer term deal, I think that says a lot about their belief that he can come through and stay healthy for at least a few of those seasons in that longer term deal.
I really recommend people do the auction calculator and sort by ADP, because it really, players pop out. Like you're like, oh my gosh. And in this group that you just mentioned, which their ADPs go from the top end at I guess Tyler O'Neill was kind of the beginning of the. Was that where we started?
Yeah, he was end of the last group, and Buxton's part of this. Yeah.
So, okay, even if let's just do Buxton from Buxton at 55 ish to Yelich around 100, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking 4 or 5 rounds. Here's the weird thing. They're all $18 players. 18, 19, 17. They're all equivalent players. So that does tell you something about, you can wait and take Bellinger or Yelich later, And especially if you're looking at George Springer versus getting one of those closers, one of the good closers. So maybe Springer versus Presley. And the auction calculator says, no, don't take Presley. He's only worth $11 or whatever. You have to know what your draft looks like. And then you have to know that George Springer, by this, has an $18 value, and Cody Bellinger and Christian Yelich have $18 values, So that pops for me when I look at this. I say these are roughly equivalent outfielders, and you can just take the one that falls, right? The other thing that pops for me is Nick Castellanos. For some reason, the projection it loves him, and he's a $23 player. And Buxton's a $21 player. Those two pop out. Edman pops out in a bad way. He's a $14 player that's in this group. Edman and Varsho. Now, Varsho, I think you can explain away with the catcher eligibility.
Yep.
But Edman, I guess you have the extra second base. But what did a plucky reader tell us? They thought it added 5 to 10% value to have extra eligibilities?
Yeah, I think that was the estimation, and I think that's fair. I mean, I'm looking at a guy like Varsho, and the bigger question for him long term, because I think our friend James Anderson tweeted this out. He doesn't think Varsho is going to have catcher eligibility in the future, right? Because if they're going to use Carson Kelly as the primary catcher and they're going to let Varsho
Yeah, he
play
looks
every
like
day
their
in the
center
outfield,
fielder. Yeah.
if he's an outfielder, he's an outfielder. Does he hit enough to justify an ADP like this in the future, or even an earlier one, without that catcher eligibility? I think that's a huge part of whether or not you believe in paying up for him now or not. I mean, you're getting the catcher flexibility now, so that's driving the price too. But if you think he's an impact bat who's going to be an everyday center fielder, that's a steal where he's going. I just think in Snakes in particular, there are so many other players I feel better about right now. I like Dalton Varsho as a player, but I have a harder time passing on him when I'm looking at the Reynolds, Bellinger, Bryant, Yelich cluster sitting right there and say, wow, all those guys. Like, even if Christian Yelich is back to a does a bit of everything floor,
Mm-hmm.
good or decent average, 15 to 18 homers, 15 steals, nice pile of runs and RBIs. If that's the player he is now, that's fine where he goes. It's not as exciting as what he was when he was an MVP candidate, but even that, it's like, well, how much better than that is Dalton Varsho going to be as an everyday player?
Yeah.
Like that's a pretty tall ask. Yeah, I'd rather have that at catcher than in the
Like Brian
outfield.
Reynolds is not the most amazing player, but is Varsho going to be Brian Reynolds?
Brian Reynolds is low key just good
Right.
across the board. I mean, we talked about Cody Bellinger back around the end of the year, and the bounce back potential seems really clear right there. I actually don't have any problem having multiples from the bottom part of this group. I've
Yeah.
had Bellinger and Yelich on the same team. I think that can actually work. I don't think that's taking on
I've
too much risk because you're getting them after pick 75, and one or both of those guys could be top 50 picks relatively easily again going into next season.
And I've put them in a bucket too, where I've been like, I'm going to take this pick now because I'm leaving Bellinger and Yelich on the board in the 8th round or something, and I think, or the 7th round, and I think I can get him coming back, and I've gotten one share of the two with that strategy. It does end up with me having Yelich more than Bellinger, and I prefer Bellinger if cost is equal, but Yelich like steals more. So it's okay. And I understand that Edmund, so let's give him the 10% extra for being a second base eligible guy, right? So we're giving him an extra dollar. So now he's $15. He's still the worst option in this group by far. And by the projections at least. And Randy Arozarena, I would actually pay the premium to get Randy Arozarena over Edmund if steals was my desire, because in this group, what you have noticed is there, other than Buxton, Arozarena, and Edmund, nobody's a plus stealer. You can get Yelich late for a few bags, but if you want more than a few bags, you're going to have to pay up for Arozarena or Edmund. And if that's where I'm stuck, I'm going to take Arozarena.
So Randy Arozarena was 20 for 30 as a base stealer last year. He popped the 20 home runs, had a 28.1% K rate. So maybe there's still some room for improvement because we're still talking about a guy with only 700 career regular season appearances or plate appearances. Does a little bit of everything. The projection systems all point to a lower batting average than he's ever had as a big league player. And again, we're talking about mostly one full season and two partials.
I think they're missing something.
I wonder. I mean, I really wonder if something's off there. It's probably just not forecasting enough potential improvement in K percentage. It's also the BABIP at 363 last year compared to projections in the 320 or even the 314 mark that the BATX puts up. That's also going to bring that average down quite a bit too. So I wonder if it's something in the batted ball profile that's possibly being missed with Randy Arozarena. But I do think the success rate on the stolen bases is sitting right in that range where they could pump the brakes on him a little bit with the steals. He could be a 12 steal guy instead of a 20 steal guy. That doesn't wreck you, though. We're talking about getting 10, 12, 15 from every spot, and he does other things. And he's also among the Rays that doesn't appear to have a clear path of falling into sharing his spot. He looks like one of their higher volume guys at this point. Maybe that's only going to be for one more year, but he's an interesting player for a lot of different reasons.
I did see that Zips founder Dan Szymborski was saying that his BABIP, his projected BABIP, his StatCast usage does have spray direction in it, which is an improvement over the ones at Savant. They do not consider the direction of the ball, and that matters because pull versus push does matter. It matters how you're defended. And Arozarena is really good at spraying the ball around, has opposite field power and pull power. And so it is interesting to me that Zips still projects him for a 325 BABIP. It's higher than some other ones, but it does only create a 256 batting average in the Zips projection. So maybe I have it wrong. Maybe he's only a 260 hitter, but I do think he's sort of across the line good in a way that Edman is not quite.
Yeah, I mean, straight up, I think anybody out there it's Randy because there's just more stuff that he does, and yeah, Edman moves around.
I'm just making the point that I think it's worth the premium too.
Well, I guess the other thing I'm looking at, look at the XBA on Randy Arozarena. It was 220 last year. Doesn't the StatCast XBA take more of those factors into account?
It does not have batted ball spray in it.
It still doesn't have spray in there. That's still, even if it did, 274 against 220.
I mean, he does hit a few too many ground balls, but for the most part, he hits them hard. So I care a little bit more about that than I care about too many ground balls.
Now I'm staring this one down, and I'm not sure. Deserves further exploration, I think, is where I've landed with Randy Arozarena. Other players in this group, Eloy Jiménez, kind of a young JD Martinez. Like, he can already do what old JD does. Can he do what young JD did, though? Can he be the kind of player that takes that leap? I think that's the next step that people are hoping for from him.
I'm really surprised he hit 249 last year. I think of Eloy as a 280 hitter every year.
Yeah, projections have him bouncing back into the 270s at least. Steamer a little lower at 267, 30 home runs, 80 for runs and RBIs. Room for more in some of those projection systems for sure. Good lineup around him.
If you have steals, you get the benefit of taking somebody like this later on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he makes a lot of sense. I'm a little nervous about Nick Castellanos leaving Cincinnati. I think he's a really good hitter. I think universal DH is good for a player like Nick Castellanos. It has to be, because there are some major defensive issues.
By the option calculator, he should be taking like 30 points higher than he is.
Yeah, so here's my issue.
I wonder what park they project him into. I guess it's just super neutral, like the
expected home runs by park in 2021. Cincinnati, 39. Like, it's the most of any place. There's other places where he would have been mid to high 30s, but there's a lot of places where he would have been
high
20s. StatCast.
On a StatCast player page?
Yeah, on a StatCast player page. There's that big chart of expected home runs by park. He's not going to turn to a pumpkin in a neutral environment or even a pitcher-friendly environment. He is a good hitter. He's been a good hitter for a long time. We've seen the power peak. I just wonder, like,
where could he go? Like, do expected home runs by San Francisco? Because he could go there.
San Francisco expected home runs 30. Yeah, still good. Still good.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm landing on this. Okay, we saw the very best of Nick Castellanos, but what are the encores going to look like? I don't think he's out of place in this group, but I'm having a hard time taking him at that ADP.
He's a weird player, man, because he's got really good strikeout rates given his really poor reach rates. He's like a hit tool god, you know? Like, I don't think that people appreciate that. I mean, he's reaching at nearly 40% of the pitches he sees, but he has a 20% strikeout rate, a 21% projected strikeout rate. I do think that at some point that becomes a problem. And I think that's a little bit part of why also his defense, that he hasn't seemed to quite get the deals that you'd expect him to get in free agency. I think that the market is telling us a little bit something where they see a little bit too much Josh Hamilton in this, where it could fall apart at some point. But he has a way better hit tool than Josh Hamilton ever did.
And he's the heel of the NL Central. At least he was. Would love to see him stay in Cincinnati, but that's just not.
I like talking to him. He has like really, he's an opinionated guy he just says his mind, and He has an interesting game, and he's an interesting player. I don't think I'll end up with a lot of shares. It's just not my type of player, really.
It should translate outside of Cincinnati well enough, though. If you look at his StatCast page, he's got 4 seasons with an XBA in red ink, top 10% of the league. He has 6 consecutive seasons with red ink on the X slug. That should play anywhere.
Yeah.
It's just a question of how much does he lose in the home run category? How much does he possibly lose in the batting average category along with that? I don't think it's a Crater situation, but if he's a 280, 28 homer guy in a different ballpark.
Well, look at that steamer projection. That like, given where he's going in drafts, that would be not disastrous, but 270, 29 homers.
Yeah,
that wouldn't be a return on your value, I don't think.
I think you'd be okay with it, but you'd be a little disappointed. You're not going to fail to win because you made that decision and got that result.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a team sinking bust. But it is. I mean, it would be a little tough because he wouldn't be giving you extra value beyond in any category. I think when you do draft him, you think, okay, this guy's going to help my batting average at the very least and keep me solid in power, right?
Mm-hmm. The last cluster of the group was, Giancarlo Stanton, Bellinger, Bryant, Yelich, and as much as I like Stanton for still being able to just hit rockets that no one else hits at a level that no one else hits them at, I still have him last of that group. I would still take everybody else of those 4.
I mean, he's 32 now. 32 is like, now you're starting. Projected bounce backs stop being as reliable at 32. It's like it's not the time. But I guess, in terms of projected bounce back, he's actually 273 with 35 homers last year. That was a good outcome. You're not projecting him to bounce back. You're just projecting him to do the same thing. But 579, of course, was one of his 4th biggest season, 5th biggest season. So to project him for more going forward, that's what I think is a little bit weird about it. He's only in this group in terms of projections if you give him 595 plate appearances, which he hasn't done since 2018. And why would he do more than he did last year?
Well,
and he's older.
You can kind of spin it either way, though. You could look at 17, 18, and 21 and say 692, 705, and 579 plate appearances. Those are all pretty good outcomes.
That's right.
And it was just, being
so 3 out of 5 years, he's a good pick.
3 out of 5. 2020 was a disaster for everybody. So whatever. Let's not worry about that. Are we putting too much stock into what happened in 2019 when evaluating his injury risk?
Is super scary, yeah.
And does he still have a ceiling above high 30s for home runs? But he doesn't need that necessarily where he's going. But I have found myself in no situation where I felt like Stanton made sense in that range. Something else has always made more sense.
Yeah, what else goes at 96? I mean, I personally, he's right there with Bellinger and Yelich, and I just rather take a bet on the guys that are 6 years younger than him and still steal some bases, right?
Yeah, like exactly. For the same kind of profile, I just feel a lot better about Bellinger, especially now he's further removed from the shoulder. Bryant, I think you get a little more balance and you get that multi-position flexibility. You can move him between the outfield and the corner or throw him just at third base directly.
And then projections even like Bellinger and Yelich better than Stanton. And there's I think a little bit less risk of that. Like if you were going to say they're all projected for about 580 plate appearances, I would say no matter what we think, Stanton is the least likely to hit the 580 plate appearances.
But I think it's as simple as this. If he slides, so if his ADP right now is around pick 90, if he slides into the next group that we'll get to on the next episode, if he falls 2 or 3 rounds, I'm in. Like I don't think he's way off. I just think the other guys that are still sitting there when he's at the top of the queue are just a little bit more interesting to me, even though the skills floor still looks really good from a raw power perspective. So hopefully this was a good start. It's probably at least a 2-episode week with the outfielders. It might turn to a 3-episode week, depending on the progress we can make in the next cluster where there's a lot of other interesting players mixed in. Kind of the most important range of your draft, I think a lot of times, is that pick 100 to 200 or pick 100 to 250 range. So we're going to try and be very thorough with that group of outfielders. Happy Draft Kit Day, by the way. If you do not have a subscription to The Athletic, this is a great time to get one. $1 a month for the first 6 months at theathletic.com/rates and barrels.
Draft kit landed today.
It's there. Get that.
Draft kit landed today. Have a piece in there about closers. A piece coming this week about beer for your draft, beer recommendations, nationally available beer recommendations. I updated the pitching ranks with depth chart positions so that you can, that helped me kind of avoid ranking 8 starters too high. So I kind of keep it in the pants moment there. And super deep sleepers. Guys I like after the 500th pick in your draft.
So be sure to check that out in the draft kit, theathletic.com/rates and barrels. Best offer we do all year, $1 a month for the first 6 months. On Twitter, you can find Eno at Eno Saris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. As always, rates and barrels at theathletic.com with any questions. You could also ask questions on this video on YouTube if you're watching us over there. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you later this week.